Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
This episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast with NASCAR driver Michael McDowell is brought to you by Compassion International. We're so thankful for Compassion partnering with us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast, and what they're doing, releasing children from poverty, is amazing. And what they allow you to do is partner up with them, $38 a month, and your money goes to food, education, medical care, and vocational training. And it's all done in the name of Jesus. It's $38, every child being discipled in the Word of God, over 150,000 children coming to know Christ and follow Christ in the last year alone because of the great work being done by Compassion International. More powerful than poverty. That's what it is. $38. You release a child from poverty by sponsoring them through Compassion International. Here's the website, compassion.com/sportspectrum. Compassion.com/sportspectrum. Join us in releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. Today on the podcast, we welcome NASCAR driver Michael McDowell to the show. Michael drives the number 34 for Front Row Motorsports and finished 26th in 2018 in the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series. He has 6 top 10 finishes in his career that began in 2008. And in the 2018 Daytona 500, Michael finished 9th in the first race of the year. And that was his 5th straight top 15 finish at Daytona and tied his career best finish in the big race. Now, of course, Sunday, February 17th, 2019, next month, Michael will be racing in the Daytona 500 yet again. So you can watch him there and check it out. But I wanted to have Michael on the podcast because I've read a lot and seen a lot about his faith. We've actually written a lot about it at sportspectrum.com. And I wanted to talk to Michael about where that faith came from, hear his testimony, which was a pretty awesome one. We also talk about faith in NASCAR, and it's such a long season in NASCAR, starting in February and going all the way into the fall, into October, and even in some cases early November. So really enjoyed having Michael on the podcast, our first NASCAR driver. And let's take a listen and learn about the journey of NASCAR driver number 34 from Front Row Motorsports. Michael McDowell joins us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Take a listen. We welcome Michael to the program. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Looking forward to talking to you, Mike, and great to have you on the podcast. Now, the 2018 season just ended, your 11th season on the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series circuit. How would you grade this past year as far as your standards and what you guys were able to accomplish this season?
Yeah, I haven't given it a grade, so that's kind of a unique way of looking at it. But I would say a B-. We had some highs and some lows, and we had some great opportunities, and we had a handful of opportunities that we failed to execute. So, all in all, probably a B-. But it was a good, solid year, but not a great year. But it showed a lot of potential, and so there's a lot to build on, and we're excited about that.
What are you most excited about going into 2019?
Yeah, just a fresh start, and every season it kind of feels like that. Our season is so long in NASCAR. We go from February all the way to November, and it's one of the longest, sporting seasons there is, in all of sports. And so when you get to the end of the season, you get to hit reset, and you get a fresh start, and you get a clean slate, and you start out at 0 points, and you start working your way back up, and it's just nice to have a fresh start.
You made your NASCAR debut in 2007 in the Craftsman Truck Series. Was racing something you always wanted to do when you were a little kid growing up?
Racing has always been a part of my life. I'm the first generation of McDowells to race, so it kind of started with me. But we did it as a family, and started out racing BMX bikes and then go-karts. And, I traveled all around the country, all around the world racing go-karts. And by the time I was about 12 years old, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. That I wanted to be a professional race car driver. And, I've had my mind set and focused on that, it feels like my entire life every weekend. And so it's been, a long journey to get to this point that I'm at now.
When was the moment when you kind of realized this might be something more than just, something you're interested in having fun with? Like this could become something where it could get to the point where you end up in a NASCAR type of world.
My path is so crooked to NASCAR that, when I first started racing professionally at the age of 16, my goal and sort of my career path was towards open wheel, towards IndyCar, and that was the direction I was heading. And at around 2006, I took a pretty sharp veer and went into stock car racing and then really set my goals on making it to NASCAR. So kind of a little stair-step journey, not your traditional path to NASCAR. But like I said, from the time, I was a young kid, I knew that this is what I wanted to do for a living. And I didn't really specify that it had to be this series or that series or anything like that. I just wanted to race cars for a living. And, I was very fortunate to get into NASCAR when I did, because at the time there was a lot of sponsors and a lot of teams looking for young guys. And I was able to break in, before the market crashed and sponsorship became difficult and race teams weren't hiring young guys and without a lot of experience or without a lot of sponsorship. So the timing of when I got into the Cup Series was really critical.
Michael McDowell is our guest here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Your faith is obviously something you don't shy away from. Why don't you take us back to the time you started your walk with the Lord and began that Christian experience? Take us to that.
Yeah, so it was right around the time that I was transitioning from, racing as a kid, as a teenager, into becoming an adult and transitioning into professional racing. It was right around the time that I was 18 years old. And really my story of faith is there was two influential guys that were helping me in my career and just in life. And they just lived their lives in a way that reflected Christ in such a way that they were extremely, attractive. Their life was, their family, everything about them, there was something different about them. And that was really the starting point of trying to see what is it that makes these guys that, were pouring into me different from, everyone else that I've interacted with over my years. And, God moved like he always does and put certain people in your life at certain times, at certain places. And when I can go back now and see all the little bits and pieces that happened, but, God just was pursuing me. And through a series of events, one of those individuals that was mentoring me passed away. And at his funeral, one of the other gentlemen that I was talking about earlier that was investing in me as well was at the funeral. And I didn't know the two knew each other. So that was one of those strange moments where I just go, oh, man, these are the two guys that I really feel like there's something different, not knowing at the time, that they were Christians, not knowing all these things. And they knew each other, and I didn't know that they knew each other. And so at that funeral, Tom asked me this question that, did I think that Ron, that was the individual that died, was in heaven? And I didn't grow up in church. And so, my perspective of heaven was that good people go to heaven. And so Ron was a great person, and so for sure he went to heaven. And so that was kind of my answer, is that, Ron was a good person. And Tom just said, well, what if I told you it had nothing to do with being a good person? And I didn't really know what he meant. And, it was a perfect opportunity for him to share the gospel with me, but he didn't. He just asked me this question, what about you? Where are you at? And that question now, I don't even know, 17 years later, is still so interesting to me, because when he asked, what about you? Where are you at? It wasn't something where he was saying, what about you? If you die today, you're going to heaven. I didn't feel any of that. I didn't feel any, conviction at the moment. It was just this question of where are you at? And God used that question over the next several weeks to challenge every area of my life. And And for the very first time over those several weeks, I started to actually have conviction about my lifestyle and what I was doing. And I started having these questions that, young adults or teenagers don't really have. Is like, how did I want to be as a husband and a father? And how do I want to be as a leader? And I think a lot of that was because these two men were great fathers and they were great leaders. And so that probably is what sparked it. But that question of where are you at just lingered in my mind. And my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, but my wife Jamie and her aunt and uncle invited us to church. And like I said, I didn't grow up in the church and didn't really know much about it, and went there and kind of had, I wasn't really looking for anything. And the pastor was speaking about that God's love and grace is a free gift, that you can't earn it and you can't work for it and you can't purchase it. And there's nothing you can do except that free gift. And so for me, that was so counter to everything that I've known. In racing, you work for everything.
Yeah.
And if you need a better motor, you buy it, and you can buy it. You can buy it, you can work for it, and you can earn it. And so that was hard for me to wrap my head around, not having to work for it, not having to buy it, and not having to be good enough. And then he just followed it up with, you can have a fresh start and a clean slate. When you accept Christ as your Lord and Savior, that he paid the price for you, and you have a fresh start. And I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know, I didn't have it all figured out. I just knew that I wanted that fresh start and that clean slate.
That's a great story. And I wonder for you, once that happened, now it's been, you said 17 years, is there a moment where you were in the other side of the role and you were able to kind of be that guy that said to someone, maybe not as in the exact situation, but be able to kind of go back to someone and challenge them, maybe a younger person, about where they are, without obviously forcing a faith on anyone. You never want to do that, but just having conversations about faith with other people. Maybe it's in NASCAR, maybe it's outside, especially with the platform God has given you now.
Yeah. So if you back up just a little bit before we jump into that, is I took this free gift of salvation and I stuck it in my pocket, and I knew I was going to heaven, and I didn't want God to really be Lord of every area of my life early in my walk. And one of those areas was my racing. And just through a series of events, just like God does, he orchestrates it all, removing and stripping or removing and stripping. I finally gave up and said, okay, God, whatever you want me to do, wherever you want me to be, I'll do it. Just show me what you want me to do. And it was at that point of full surrender, my career, my platform, even my speaking ability. I've always loved to speak. I've always loved to be the comedian class clown, and I always loved the camera and interviews and all those things. And that was very beneficial to me in my career. And then I realized that those gifts that God had given me weren't for those things for me, but they was to glorify him and make him known. So then I became an evangelist. I mean, I really did. It was like, once I fully surrendered, I realized that I love speaking and I love talking with people. And if I'm going to do that, then I need to be doing it, one, to glorify God, and two, to lead people to Christ. And so to answer your question now is, that's something that, I've, over the years, have just had the privilege of leading people to the Lord and investing in discipleship and small groups. And my wife and I have led, several, marriage studies in our home. And I mean, so many cool things that God has let me be a part of. And I'm just passionate about, people coming to know Christ. And part of that is just a realization that you're either alive in Christ or you're dead, and there's no in between. And It's harsh to say that. And I'm not the creator, and it's even hard for me to say that, but when you can see people as either alive in Christ or dead, regardless of their financial situation or their health or their marriage or their kids, but they're either alive or dead, then that changes how you utilize your time and you invest in your time with people, because the end goal is for everybody to be alive in Christ, and that's what Christ died for, not just for me or for a handful of selected people, but for everybody. And so that is what I'm passionate about, and the platform that I have is just for that. And anything other than that is not being a good steward for me of what God's given me.
I love that. And I wonder, Michael, for you now, as you walk with the Lord, let's pretend somebody's listening and they're wondering, that's great, but I have a hard time sharing my faith. I have, I'm scared. I don't know how to pray in public. Whatever the fear is, which there is a lot of fear, I think, in people who are Christians and who are believers in sharing your faith. I've been told that's one of the number one fears for Christians, is just talking about Christ to somebody else. Encourage them, share with them maybe some of the things that you've learned and been a part of over the years that you can encourage some of our listeners through as they, try to figure out the best way to tell others about Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that for me, I have a lot of, friends or other believers that are not wired like me, that, aren't just full out trying to find somebody to talk to Christ about. And so I totally understand that. But I can tell you that you can still have an impact. No different than the two guys that had an impact on me, never shared Christ with me. Their lives just looked different than everybody else, and their lives spoke. And I think that is an important part of it. Our actions should lead our words, and those guys did. And the other side of it too is that when you're authentic and you just be you, if God's working in your life, it's going to come out. It can't help itself. Like, that's just the way God is that if you're committed to your relationship with Christ and you're pursuing Him, there's no way that you can't impact the people around you. It would be impossible. And whether that's just with being kind, whether that's being generous, whether that's being plugged in a group, whether that's sharing your faith, whether that's sharing a meaningful conversation over lunch in a corporate setting, whatever it might be, the platform and the opportunity that you have is the same as mine, is that the area between your feet, wherever God has you, that area between your feet, that's your mission field. And when you are pursuing Him, you don't have to pursue opportunities to share Christ. It just happens. And then the fear side of it is that, just like anything, is you just have to step out in faith. I mean, if you look at who God used in the Bible over all of history, it wasn't the most capable, it wasn't the most knowledgeable, it wasn't the most moral, it wasn't the most religious. It was broken, fallen people that many times said no, and God still used them. And so just don't give up. And I think that's the biggest thing is that if you've missed an opportunity, God will reveal that to you. And the next time an opportunity comes up, you'll be more confident not to miss it. And for me, I've learned more from the opportunities I've missed than the times that I've tried to go out and find them. And it's just time and time again, when I know that I've missed something, it's not a condemnation, and it's not even it's just that little stirring of, oh man, I should have turned around, or I should have said something. And the next time that comes up, I'm more prepared and I'm ready for it.
That's really good. A couple more questions here with Michael McDowell on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Can you just share the story? I was reading this story as I was preparing for the interview of the crash that you sustained in 2008. And you saw God's hand in the aftermath of that. I wonder, because I think a lot of our listeners, especially those who are NASCAR fans and race car fans, they wonder about those moments when you're just kind of woken up by having those kind of, wrecks or crashes or whatever they are, especially when you're racing cars at such a speed that you are. Can you share that story from 2008?
Yeah. So, it is the highlight of my career, but not the one I wanted.
No, I understand.
But same thing, God uses all things to good, and for those that love Him and call upon His name, and that was one of those situations where I had this very scary crash in Texas in 2008 qualifying, and you can watch it on YouTube, and all you got to do is search my name. It'll be the first thing that comes up. That's my highlight. And it's this horrific crash, and I was able to walk away with, just some bruises and, no broken bones. I raced the next day. It's nothing short of miraculous. And because of the severity of the crash and sort of the miracle of me walking away, the next, 2 weeks I was on Today's Show and Ellen and, every show you could be on, and everybody talking about this crash. And it was, a moment for me to realize that this is what my platform is, and I can use it to grow my brand and to use it to market and kind of build my status. Or like we talked about before, I can use this to glorify God and what He's done and the miracle that He provided through that accident. And so it was one of those real defining moments, not just in my faith, but in my career of what am I going to stand for and what am I going to be about? And it was one of those real moments where your feet were held to the fire, of everybody wanted to talk about, walking away from this accident and just, how to get in the car the next day, you got to be a superstar and Superman. And I'm just like, it's nothing to do with that and just God's hand on it. And so it was fun to go through that journey. And it was real, like I said, it was real eye-opening for me of what your platform can do.
Michael, what's a Bible verse that's been most influential for you in your life and your walk with the Lord?
Yeah, not the one that y'all would think. Just James 1:2. Just consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you face trials of many kinds. And just the testing of our faith that leads to perseverance, and perseverance to endurance. And I know that that's not the funnest, coolest Bible verse, but it's mine. And because for majority of my NASCAR career, it has been a struggle, and it has been trial after trial. And my expectations coming into the sport was to win races and win championships. And, 11 years later, I've won one race and I've never even been close to winning the championship. And so for me, I grew, and I'm still growing through those trials. And I've seen it time and time again of God's faithfulness and just the perseverance that it's not even that I'm creating, that He's creating in me, just trusting and knowing that He's the provider and He's the sustainer. And as soon as I start to feel like I have it going and I can control it, or I'm doing well, God just reminds me with a trial of it's not about me, and it's not about my confidence, and it's not about my circumstances or my financial situation or my job situation or job security, that He is faithful and He is good and He wants the best, the very best for me and my family. And even if that's a trial after trial. And like I said, I know it's not a warm and fuzzy one, but it's mine. Yeah.
Hey, it's a great reminder for all of us, because none of us are immune to trials. So I think that's a really good encouragement there. Michael McDowell, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, and hopefully we'll catch up with you during the 2019 season and catch up and see what the Lord's doing in your life then. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And many thanks to Michael McDowell, the NASCAR driver, number 34, Front Row Motorsports, for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. Really like talking to Mike and hearing about NASCAR and hearing about faith in NASCAR and hearing his story, which is a pretty awesome one. You can give Mike a follow on Twitter at MC_driver, MC_driver on Twitter for Michael McDowell, and we thank him for joining us here on the Sports Spectrum podcast. We also thank you for listening to this podcast on Apple, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, everywhere podcasts are found. Hit that subscribe button and become part of our family by listening to the Sports Spectrum podcast every single time new episodes released practically daily. And it's been really a cool journey in 2018 and 2019 to bring you more stories of sports and faith. We started out as a podcast that was just once a week, and now we're able to bring you really stories every day on the intersection of sports and faith. At least 3 to 5 times a week, you're going to hear a brand new episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast like this one with Michael McDowell. Of course, check out all of our social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at sports_spectrum. And you can find us on our website. That's where all of our content is found, sportsspectrum.com. Daily devotionals, articles on the intersection of sports and faith every single day. We also want to encourage you for just $18. It's a great deal. Subscribe to the Sports Spectrum magazine. That is the foundation of this ministry at Sports Spectrum, was the magazine. It started back in 1985 and is still going strong. And now we're a quarterly magazine, and it's awesome. It's a really great magazine for just $18. It's the best deal that you'll find around anywhere. $18 for an entire year. Get you the Sports Spectrum magazine. Go to sportsspectrum.com and subscribe today. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time with a new episode of the Sports Spectrum podcast. Have a great rest of your day.